it's funny, she just kind of pops in my head a lot lately as I'm thinking about growth and thinking about, if I hit a roadblock and I'm like, I just want to talk to Makisha right now. I just need to hear her voice. And I know that you do that for so many people. So I can't wait for you to share your story and inspire others to, lift themselves up because of what you do for them every day. And I'm going to read all the amazing things about you because there's a list. So today's speaker, Makisha Booth, founder of SistahBiz Global Network, has been honored by the Colorado Black Chamber of Commerce with the Clara Brown Award. She is a recipient of the U.S. Small Business Administration Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. She is the founder and head business coach of SistahBiz Global Network, a business accelerator for Black women entrepreneurs. They also help Black women solopreneurs and micro businesses build scalable, sellable businesses. As a rapid improvement coach, Makisha helps small businesses rethink their revenue strategies, brands, systems, resource allocation, and human capital strategies. As principal of Pivot Innovation Solutions, a strategic facilitation and planning agency in Denver, Colorado, Makisha is a sought-after strategist for organizational development, community engagement, and diversity, inclusion, and equity work. Before founding Pivot and SistahBiz, Makisha co-founded and led the Denver Public Schools Innovation Lab, Imaginarium. The lab was the first district-run lab of its kind in the nation and was designed to help principals redesign their school models and test new instructional strategies in the classroom. Makisha's worked in politics and education reform on the national, state, and local levels to pass landmark innovation and choice legislation. She also served as the senior advisor to the Colorado State Senate president. She also owned and operated Yaya Spa, LLC in Denver, Colorado, which was featured in Black Enterprise and was known for its nostalgic atmosphere and specialty pedicures. And she is someone that I look up to on the daily, and I'm so proud that you're here with us and willing to share your amazing story. So welcome, Makisha.
Hey, thanks, sis. That was a long bio. I don't think I've heard anybody read the whole thing before. I'm gonna have to shorten it.
So funny to like some bio read, but yeah, I have to. You're amazing.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me today. Thank you to Bank of America for making space for women to have these sorts of conversations and collaboration and inspiration. And of course, I love you to death, Kristen, and thank you for your entire team doing this work. We need it so badly right now with everything that's going on. So thank you.
Thanks. All right, well, let's get into it. So Makisha, I know a little bit about your story, and at Powerful Voices, we like to talk about what we as women leaders have to overcome in order to get where we are. I think it's a common theme that women bring to the workforce. We all share unique journeys and experiences, and I think it's important for us to be vulnerable because as more women share their stories, especially in the workplace, I think it's going to create amazing cultures, and it's going to have, HR and other leaders appreciate people's journeys. So can you tell us about yours and, growing up in Harlem?
Yeah, so first let me say I agree with you. I think that it's also about owning your truth and not being afraid of it and embracing it and knowing that in your truth, when you tell your story, it frees you as well as saves others. And so I've learned to tell my story freely and unapologetically over the years, and it has been empowering. So I encourage us all to do that. But yeah, so I grew up in Harlem, New York, 130th between 5th and Lenox. And I know how to code switch really well now. So I can mostly do a Denver accent here. And then when I cross the bridge, then it's all over. I'm back to Keisha from the block. But yeah, I grew up in Harlem, New York in the early 80s, mid 80s into the early 90s, and then moved to Colorado. But prior to that, that was the time frame in Harlem and New York of the crack cocaine era is what I kind of grew up in, and really had a lot going on in that regard in terms of my own family. My mother was an addict. At some point, I talked to you a little bit about this before. I was on the streets for a good couple of years in terms of just not having any parenting really happening. And then my grandmother and my aunt adopted me and took me and my sisters in and started my life over. And I was in 6th grade at that point. And from there, it just kind of changed the game between my grandmother and my aunt and my 6th grade teacher, who is amazing, and from Jamaica. I don't know about any of you who have Caribbean background, but all my teachers, when I ended up going back to school, all my teachers were Caribbean, and they don't play. So, and neither does my aunt or my grandmother. So it just really kind of whipped me back into shape and gave me the structure I needed to rebound from what was happening in my life. And yeah, I don't know. I think that I hadn't told this story before until I was talking to, I think, your team member and someone else recently. It came up recently. So it must be the time for me to acknowledge that this story is actually a thing. Like this is a big deal, what you went through. But I hadn't told the story. So I still have sort of like all these fond memories of growing up in Harlem, while at the same time acknowledging that, you know, it was a tough ride during that time for me and my community. I had a group of friends, there were 6 of us, and all of our parents were crack cocaine addicts. And so we were like on, you know, out a lot together, and everybody in that group, their parents died except for mine. I moved to Colorado because my mother ended up coming here to really start a new life for us. And she came here and moved us out here after she kind of got herself together. But, you know, I just remember what my 6th grade teacher used to always say during that time. She used to always make us say in the morning, "There go I, but for the grace of God." And so, yeah, it was a tough start to growing up, and right in that kind of space when I was 11, 12 was when everything started to really transition for me. And so I think that impacts me a lot. I have a tough spirit, and it kind of comes from that.
Thanks for sharing that. And I shared with you that I have, you know, a background that includes addiction in my family too. And it's interesting sometimes, and I don't know if you deal with this too, Makisha, but it's like you said, like we have to be vulnerable and be willing to share it. I used to be so ashamed of my background when it related to that. And now I don't know that I count it as a blessing, but I do think that, you know, think that it's helped me overcome so much, and it's made me the leader that I am. So thanks for sharing that. You said that your grandmother and aunt were influential people in your life. How did they support you?
The structure that they provided in my life and just the things they taught me. First and foremost, they introduced me and kind of cultivated my relationship with God, which is central to my life and everything I do. I don't start my day without anchoring in God. And so that was the first big gift that my grandmother gave me and my aunt gave me, making me go to church and praying every day and anchoring everything we did as a family in God. And then just having dinner around the table, which nobody does anymore. But back then, I wasn't doing it either. And they had me start doing that with them. And so me and my sisters having dinner at the table every night. But they're really tough women, really tough women. My great grandmother grew up down south in South Carolina, came to Harlem during the Great Migration. And during that time was the only Black woman on the block who was able to purchase a brownstone. Ran her salon parlor out of the brownstone, and basically was the big mama of our family that became our headquarters and is still in our family today. And my aunt and my grandmother are just really strong. Like we've been through a lot as a family and as a culture. And so they just raised me to be really strong. And my aunt was really critical. They call me her mini me. So if you can imagine someone who's like a beast compared to me, she, in terms of accountability, in terms of strength, even now when I go home, because I go home to visit them every year, you know, except for the pandemic year, but she has she's like 20 years older than me and can wear me out in whatever we're doing. She has energy. She does not stop. And she just taught me that. She taught me to keep going. She taught me to get up. She told me not to stop. She never let me make excuses. It just isn't worth it. You ever have somebody that holds you so accountable that it's not even worth it to try to make an excuse, because that makes it worse. You just be like, you got it. You right. I was wrong. I'm gonna handle that. I'm on it right now. That was how she raised me. And so that's how I am. And those tools and skills are what I use today to coach and support other women.
It's so, it's so funny that you say that, Makisha, because I found, like, when I was younger, and I don't know if you were like this, but when I was younger, maybe not because you had that lesson at a young age, but I had friends oftentimes that told me what I wanted to hear. And now I only have friends that push back, and they're like, you're full of it. Like, what are you talking about? Or, no, that outfit doesn't look good on you. You know what I mean? Learning. I mean, it's so important to have those relationships in your life. And I really have found that as I get older, I have no space for the ones that, aren't that way, right? We need that pushback. We need that in our life. So what a gift, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My son's middle name is Truth. And I'm all about truth, discovering it, finding it, re-examining it, building on it. Like, truth is so real. And when I remember when I worked at the state Senate, I worked for 3 Senate presidents in a row, the final one being Brandon Schaefer. And I remember him saying one day, and I think it was mostly a compliment, but he said, I have like 40 people reporting to me on a day-to-day basis that I'm interacting with. And the one person I know will tell me the truth is Makisha. And and so I really am about like being, because I want to see you win, and you hired me so you could win. And so you need to get this truth so that we can make the proper adjustments to get where we're trying to go. And so that's just always been a characteristic and a flaw too. I've had to learn how to, over the years, package it better sometimes, but it's still a little, some of my sisterpreneurs are in the audience today. They'll tell you it's still 100% keep it real style, but definitely have learned over the years how to really enhance emotional intelligence and learn how to deliver something so that people actually receive it.
Yeah, I think that it's a gift. I do. And I think that I think leaders are becoming more comfortable with hiring people that don't tell them everything that they think they want to hear, right? They're hiring people that push back and tell them where the flaws in their plan are. It's so important right now. And I do think that that's a gift that women bring. I've been in many boardrooms where the CEO would speak and everybody would nod, and it would usually be the women in the room that were like, but wait a minute, right? Like, I'm not sure, and it's hard because it's a cultural shift, but it's a necessary one. So thank you for doing that. And thanks for speaking the truth, because we need to hear it.
It's one of the reasons why there's a mass exodus of Black women out of corporate America in their 9-to-5s. Because when we speak truth, you say you want it, and then when you get it, you don't want it. And you don't know how to handle it. And sometimes it turns out as a backlash on you. And I'm not just saying this from my own experience. I'm saying this because I talk with hundreds of Black women every single day. And I'm saying this because the research is showing, like, there's a report out from the Kansas City Federal Reserve that talks about Black women entrepreneurs and how a lot of Black women are going into entrepreneurial space because they've been pushed out of their 9-to-5 or their mainstream institution. And there's a cycle that happens in terms of them being exciting, starting somewhere where the culture says, this is what we stand for. These are our values. This is what we're trying to do. And we've hired you because we know you're a go-getter. We know you're strong. We know you're going to speak out. You're going to tell the truth. And then when that process starts to happen and people realize that means there's internal work you have to do. It's not just data. It's not just resources, but there's internal work you have to do. You have to start redistributing resources. You have to start doing some courageous things. And then everybody's not signed up for that. And so women, Black women, but also women generally tend to be the ones that can show up and speak that truth and sometimes pay for it. Often Black women pay for it.
I hate that, but it's true, right? Like, and It's unfortunate because without that voice and without that pushback, companies, they think they're doing well, but how much better would they be doing if they're pointing out all the holes in the plan and how it could be done better, right? And so we've got to see that change. And we have to see corporations come to the table and have the hard conversations, right? And we often don't want to hear them. So yeah. Well, that's why there's organizations like yours and ours to help women grow and change the system. And if they're not going to change it in corporate America, we'll change it in our own businesses and grow them and
Right, exactly.
and see it differently.
Hence the stats that Summer mentioned, that we are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the country. Absolutely, we can change it. You can change anything you want to change from right where you are.
Makisha, tell us about moving to Colorado.
That's hilarious. That is the major story of culture shock. You know, came here when I was a senior in high school, and you know, gosh, like what was that like? Oh, goodness. I had never really seen white people that much before I came here. I grew up in Harlem, so like, and I grew up, and I never really went. I was like Dorothy on the Wiz, not the Wizard of Oz. She used to tell her she needs to go south of 125th Street. Well, I never did either, really, for the most part, except to go to school in the Bronx. And so the only white women or men that I really knew were my grandmother ended up sending me to Catholic school. And so all the nuns, so I had half nuns and half Caribbean teachers. And y'all want to know why, like, I'm a tough girl. And so the nuns were white and the Caribbean teachers were the other kind of half of the teacher population there. And so when I came to Colorado, it was just so much to learn. I mean, like just so much to learn, so much to be exposed to, just a great deal of, I think it's important to mention this because there are little things that I didn't know how to do, or language I didn't know how to speak, in terms of cross-cultural language, the language of business, the language of the workforce that I didn't know, the mainstream language that is, because that's where the money and the power is. And so now that I run SistahBiz and work with women younger than me often, and mentor others, I understand when Black women are coming from that space in the gap, like the learning curve that's there, in addition to the normal stuff you're doing to start a business. There are some things that a language we've never been exposed to, groups and networking we've never been exposed to, ideas and concepts and cultural norms that we've never been exposed to, or that we may have been exposed to it, but we haven't adopted or learned how to maneuver them in our space so we can be successful too. And so moving here to Colorado, those first few years was, the first 7 years, I didn't even like it. And I was young, and you pull somebody out of their senior year of high school, you're gonna get drama. And so it was an adjustment, to say the least. Yeah, and a little bit of a blur. Nobody's asked me that question ever in an interview.
You were a senior in high school when you moved to Colorado?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that in and of itself is difficult enough. Tell me about your experience just in school in general. Like what did you learn while you were there, and how did it shape where you got to where you are? Like, did that help you kind of determine knowing what you wanted to do, or did it prep you to want to go to college? Share that with us.
Not really. No. CU Denver is where I would say the biggest transformation happened for me. I studied Indigenous political systems under Professor Glenn Morris. And in that work, I studied Native traditions and Native political systems, and the story and history of the white man and the Indian, and all that has been done over the years to underserved populations. And just that whole in-depth study under him was powerful for me. It really led me to understand the layers. So when it's frustrating to be in interviews, especially this past year, I'm appreciative of the fact that light is being shined on the things that we're going through as a people. But it's frustrating for someone to ask me to describe in 5 or 10 minutes what took me 20 years to study and learn and experience. And the layers and just the history, knowing your history and reading and studying, experiencing it, it takes time. And so to try to extract that from me in an interview sometimes is a little like, do you have a day or two for me to get the list together of things that you need to learn? Because we're not going to solve it here. Like, I'm not going to explain it to you here. And so I would say that's how impactful CU Denver was for me, where I just really spent years deep diving into racism and anti-racism and the tools of oppression and that sort of thing. And it really was the thing that's, really anchored all the equity work I do today.
That's awesome. And so you went from high school, did you go straight to CU Denver, or what was your path?
No. In fact, I wasn't even, I wasn't signed up to go to school. I had graduated. Now, keep in mind, I know now, I didn't know this then, but I know now that I was a gifted child because I missed like my whole 5th grade year of school, popped back in there and was getting A's and B's. And a gifted teacher told me once I got here, I had my son in a gifted school, and she was mentioning to me, sort of explaining, and long story short, I know now that back then, I was gifted in certain spaces in academics and could have done whatever I wanted, but I just didn't have a guidance counselor or anybody to help me get there. So I was sitting at home after I had graduated from high school, and I always said I wanted to go to college and I was going to do it, but I was sitting at home and just nobody helped me through the application process. That simple. And I want that to be a note to people that our numbers look the way they look for simple things like that. You got a lot of gifted kids at home right now that just didn't have someone to walk them through the process. Untapped talent. But anyway, so my mother was like, get up. She woke me up one morning and she was like, get up. And she said, get dressed. So I got dressed and we got in her hoopty car. She had this real bad hoopty that none of us wanted to drive in. And she drove me to Arapahoe Community College, and we went in the admissions office, and she was like, I don't know who we need to talk to, but she going to school. And so they sat me down, they got me enrolled. There was a VP, a Black woman VP at that time named Dr. Lane at ACC. And I remember she had come to my high school and talked, and I just remembered her, and she was just like, oh, and I saw her at the elevator and I was like, Dr. Lane, and she couldn't believe I remembered her name. And she took me under her wing there. And I remember I was going to school, I decided I was going to be a paralegal. And she was like, paralegal? She was like, go all the way, go to law school. Why not law school? And so I was like, okay. So I start, taking poli-sci classes, and that derailed the law school idea because I just fell in love with politics and political systems. And that's when I ended up transferring over to CU and doing my 4-year in political science. And so yeah, that was my pathway. I was like kind of chilling, and my mother was like, not in this house, not today, Satan.
Oh my gosh, I love you. That's awesome too. I had I did community college for a while too, and I think they're often sold so short for what they do and how they frame people and help you go to where you're going. And so I'm glad that you have that experience and that you talk about it, because I think more people need to hear it, especially right now with the cost of college and everything that's going on with the pandemic. So thanks for sharing that. So you're obviously a tremendous advocate for women, including me. Can you share some examples of, and these are things that you've kind of shared before, so I'm teeing you off, your first week in a corporate job and finding out that people haven't been paid, starting Pivot, supporting women wanting to leave corporate and start their own business. Like, how do you advocate for all of that based on your experience?
Oh yeah, so that wasn't my first week in a corporate job. That was my first week taking a leadership role where I was managing a team of that size. And in the first week, I did a round of one-on-ones, and there was a woman, a white woman, was working for me, and she was sitting down, and she was amazing. She's a Harvard grad. She was just dope, and we were talking and I was getting sort of an understanding of what her work prior to working under me was, and working with me was. And she said, we had the discussion, and then toward the end of the discussion, she was like, so do you think that I could get paid? And I was like, what? And she was like, can I get, my check? Like, can I get paid? And this is a major institution. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, I haven't gotten paid yet. She had been with the organization for like 5 months. I was like, what? And she was like, I was like, well, what in the good God? And so I leave the room and I go to HR, and I was like, what the hell? If somebody don't pay her today. And so, so they took care of that. And then I had another one-to-one with a Black woman who was more experienced than anyone else on her team. And she was getting paid ridiculously lower than everyone else on the team. She could train the rest of the team. That's how experienced and good at what she was doing was. And she didn't know she was not paid at the same rate or higher than the other team. None of them knew. And so when I was looking at the numbers, I was like, what the hell is this? And I asked the person I report to, and the person was like, well, what happened was, see that excuse thing I told you about my aunt? No excuses. Pay her, raise her salary today, this week, not on my watch. And so when she got her raise, she had no idea why she got a raise and why it was that significant. I'm talking like 20K, 25K. And she was like, oh my goodness, thank you so much. And so those sorts of things were happening in the organization. And I don't know, I don't wait to do stuff. I don't say one day we'll figure out this whole inequity thing. No, today, what gets done today. And you know how to make things happen when you want them to happen, especially institutions with resources. So knock it off and pay her. And I didn't make the best of friends in that organization with a lot of people, but it was because I was constantly making moves like that they said were in line with their values.
But again, I go back to, how you learned how to do that and how important it is, and holding the organization accountable to doing the freaking right thing. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. And it does, and it happens all the time. And, I've certainly experienced it too. And there's always excuses. And so did those sorts of situations sort of, kind of lead you out of corporate America and to do your own thing? Or was it sort of a conglomeration of all of it? Just hands up and like, I'm done. I want to change things.
That's a nice euphemism for being kicked out. But yeah, I definitely left on out of there and started SistahBiz. And it was kind of traumatic for me because I'm a little bit type A, and I'm about excellence, or at least I strive to be about excellence in everything I do. And so to get fired from a 6-figure job is traumatic for someone like that, and who really takes seriously what they do. And so I was like at home in like PJs, like not washing up as often as I probably should have for like 3 weeks. And, I pulled out this big board. I have a graphic facilitation certification, so I can do, I have this big canvas from one side of my wall to the other side and all my little fancy markers. And I just start writing out, because I had decided that this time I wasn't going to go with an opportunity that fell in my lap. This time I was going to decide and design my life and what I wanted it to look like in the next steps. I said, okay, you put a good 25 years into your career. You get to choose what you want to do now. Let's do it. And so I pulled out the canvas and I started mapping out what I wanted to do. And I was consulting. So it had been, I had picked up a consulting gig and started my little consulting job. So I wasn't out of work very long, maybe like a week or two before someone called me and said, we heard you're gone. But I had decided that I was going to build my empire. And so I started mapping out what I was gonna do. And I gave myself the chance to explore. So like 1 week I was like selling hair bundles. The next week I was in the oil and gas industry. And like, I was just doing the most. I was all over the place doing, I was literally Googling and doing research and trying to figure out, what do you want to do? The world is yours. And so I was doing the consulting, and as I was doing the business and the education consulting, Black women started calling me because they had heard that like I had moved out of that space and what some of the things that happened to me, and they started calling me for like lunch and coffees. It was like a chain of lunch and coffees that happened. And I think they happened because I think Spirit wanted me to know that hair bundles was not happening, and neither was oil and gas. Knock it off. You're going to use your tools and everything you just went through was absolutely part of what you needed to go through for what you're about to do. Every experience you had, all of this is a part, it's a setup. And so when that came out in those series of coffees where I would sit across the table from a Black woman who had been pushed out of corporate America or mainstream America, or was on her way out and really struggling mentally and emotionally and didn't know what to do and wanted to start her own business and was asking me for help. That happened like 6 or 7 times within 2 months. That's a sign. I didn't call them, they came for me. And so I was like, that's a sign. So I started doing my research, and this is back in 2017, I think. I started doing my research and seeing that Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the country. And anecdotally, I'm experiencing that a lot of this has to do with leaving mainstream America and feeling pushed out. So I start coaching these women in my home, one-on-one, and it just kind of grew. It just started, more women started coming. And when I started meeting with them, the trends in the trauma and the stories were there. And so I felt it would be good for us to come together as a group and for me to start bringing them together. So we met in my house the very first time. I remember, I just remembered something that I completely forgot that makes me emotional. And there was this one girl there, and she said, one woman came to one of the meetings and she said, "You're gonna be our Harriet Tubman." So I knew it was right because it was just right. And I kept going with it and bringing more women together. And I have a background in adult learning curriculum design. So I started to create programs out of the discussions and the coaching materials and everything that I was doing and building frameworks around it all. And it turned into, then hundreds of women coming to boot camps and brunches and, dozens of women. And in those initial boot camps where there were like 25 to 30 women, I always would ask, like, how many of you have a loan, a business loan? And always 1, maybe 2 people would raise their hand. Everybody else was bootstrapping. Everybody else was paying with money from their day job or just didn't have resources and was just out there getting it done, trying to figure it out. And so that's how we started our deep dive loan readiness program and launched our loan fund and to date, we've raised $775,000 for Black women in Colorado for loans. And it just kind of grew. It just grew, and now it's national, and there are women all over the country that are members and participants. And that's kind of how it started out, though, how the exit from corporate, and it's the best thing I've ever done. I'm so glad I got fired. Thank you to all of y'all who fired me.
Makisha, you got me teary-eyed too, because like when I hear you tell that story, you're a leader that inspires everyone, right? Like you inspire me, you inspire everyone on this call. I know that like looking back on this, we're going to be looking back on you, and you're going to be in a position of leadership where you're lifting everyone up. So thank you for sharing that. I'm crying too, because you do that for me too. You do. You help me grow, and you help a lot of women-owned businesses grow, just hearing your story. So thank you. Thank you for fighting for everyone. Dang it. I must really want to cry. tell me, who is the person in your life that's inspired you the most and why?
My aunt.
Your mom?
My aunt.
Your aunt?
My aunt that raised me. Because she keeps going. She doesn't stop. She gets back up. Like, the word unstoppable is my word, because never underestimate a person that is just going to keep getting up. So you might be able to knock them down. You might be able to get them, but don't underestimate them if they know how to get up. And I just keep going. I get up and I keep going. And I learned that from her. And I'm serious when I say this woman she's got to be, let's see, I'm 40. She got to be like in her mid 60s or early to mid 60s. And she really does have that energy and that fire to keep going. And she doesn't stop. Like, she doesn't let anybody tell her no. She is a hold my beer kind of lady. Mm-hmm. And she passed that on to me. And when I have days where I don't want to get up, I just pretend she's in the house. Like, Auntie Larry gonna be coming in this room any second now. Get up. When I want to give up, and I had a really traumatic, relationship situation happen in business this past year, and I was bawling, crying, and I called her, and it was almost like she didn't give me the space to cry too long. Like, she let me in the beginning, but then she was like, okay, pull it together, because you got to be ready. That's exactly what she said to me. She said, you got to be ready. And she said it like 3 times. You know how when people say things 3 times, it's like something about it. It's like, you got to be ready. And so I need you to calm down so we can figure out and just dissect what happened here and figure it out. And that's today that I lean on her in that way, and that I remember her in that way when on my hard days. And so, yeah, she absolutely inspires me. And we never do anything without starting in prayer. We never do anything without praising God for the blessings. We never do anything, without that kind of spiritual foundation. So she absolutely inspires me. My grandmother would be, next right after, because when my grandmother I went to South Carolina with my grandmother it's a whole long story after I left that job. But I went to South Carolina and New York to do sort of like a Sankofa trip, which is like a return to your roots trip. And I went to New York to kind of really be loved on by my aunt and grandmother to get through that time. And then I took my grandmother, who at the time was 89, to South Carolina so that she could be on the land where her mother was. And we have roots in what's called the Gullah tribe in South Carolina. And so we went down there, and during the trip, we had this amazing epiphany of a trip. And I remember hearing so much in spirit that, like, you're getting ready to do some really big things. You stand on the shoulders of many great women who have gone through way more than anything you're going through. And we're counting on you to keep going. And that was that South Carolina trip. And when she was there at the last day, when she was supposed to go back, she had an aneurysm in a restaurant. And we ended up staying in South Carolina an additional 4 weeks and going to the hospital. And I remember watching her go through it in the hospital, where she literally was on the bench, and she was like, I don't know what's happening, God, but I trust you. And I know, like, she's in the middle of having it, like, and so those sorts of things inspire me to remember what to do when ish gets really hard and it gets really real, that you can dig deep down and find everything you need to get through it.
There's a question in the chat that I want to ask right now instead of waiting, because I have to know the answer to this too. Who inspires your aunt? Who was her mentor? How did she get to be so strong?
My grandmother. Yeah, exactly. I come from a lineage of powerful, strong women who have been through, but my great grandmother, I would say, was probably one of her biggest inspirations, obviously her mother, but my great grandmother really, like, she ran a micro loan program out of her basement. I didn't find this out until after I started my loan fund. They just kind of happened to mention to me, oh, you got a loan fund? Great grandma had a loan fund. Oh, y'all ain't gonna tell me that? Nobody was gonna tell me that we had a whole micro loan fund in the basement. But back then, Black people could not get money from banks, or did not have the opportunity to do any business with banks. And so she launched a version of that what we would now call a microloan program. She didn't call it that then, in giving circles out of her basement. And she was powerful. Like I said, she purchased a brownstone in the late 20s in New York, in Harlem. And she's a Black woman. She's the only Black woman on the block that owned property at that time. And so I know that my aunt draws from her. In fact, when we were in South Carolina and my grandmother was in the hospital, my aunt got on a plane. And prior to coming down, because she really kind of gave it to me. I called her, I was hysterical, and she did her "you got to be ready" thing. But she was like, I gotta depend on you. She was like, all that stuff you learned in college and running all these businesses and doing all that fancy stuff. She's like, I need you to pull all those tools and skills to interview these doctors, write down every piece of medicine, like she just went down. She's like, I'm counting on you. And I'm getting on a plane now. I'm counting on you. And she got on the plane and she came the next day. And when she walked into the hospital, now I had heard my great-grandmother speak to me during that time in the hospital. My grandmother was laying on the bench, and my great-grandmother, I heard her say to me, get a notepad and write it down. I promise you. I didn't tell nobody because I was, and I said to the doctor next to me, I said, did you hear that? And he was like, and I was like, all right, I'm bugging. So I was like, okay, so between my aunt telling me to write everything down and my great-grandmother being there, then my aunt came the next day to the hospital, and she walked in the hospital and she was like, before she started to hug me and she stopped, she said, I feel my grandmother here. And I was like, I'm not crazy. She gave me a big old hug. And then we handled the business of getting my grandmother ready, which my grandmother, that was her second aneurysm. She had one in the 70s and went through brain surgery. Then this was the one she had with me. I was like, oh, great, thanks. I get to be the one that you have the aneurysm with in South Carolina right after I get fired and my self-esteem is shot. And so anyway, so this is her second one. She is now 93 years old and still running with it. When I say I come from a strong lineage of women, like 2 aneurysms, like, go ahead and fire me. You know what kind of strength I got up in me? You know what these genes is carrying?
Oh my gosh, I love that. We're getting blown up in chat, and I am going to turn it over to Heather or Morgan, whichever one of you wants to kind of pick on some questions and call out on people.
You bet. Let's start with Megan Carabello. I know she had a question.
I thought you were just going to ask it for me, Morgan.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Okay. Everyone's talking about Goosebumps, and I'm still recovering from the Harriet Tubman reference and also the idea of being unstoppable. But my question was actually about imposter syndrome. And I know a lot of women on this call probably have experienced some of that, any of the entrepreneurs here. And so I was wondering how you address that for yourself, and then also how do you coach around that? Because I know you coach about imposter syndrome, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, you're dead on. Like a lot of us experience that. And in fact, like maybe 2 weeks ago, I posted in our private SistahBiz group, I said, some of y'all don't need a coach. Some of y'all just need to hear somebody else say, you got this. Because that's where that imposter syndrome kicks in, and it's those negative thoughts in your head that tell you you're not worthy or you're not capable, or everybody else has more together than you or has some sort of credential or ability that you don't have. And I don't know that imposter syndrome is something I suffer from deeply, but I have experienced it. And when I've experienced it, the reason why I don't experience it as much now is because every time I would go to a new level in my career, in my life, and I get somewhere where I'm like, okay, I'm here with y'all, and this is a big deal. And then I'm looking around and I'm like, ain't none of y'all got y'all shit together either. And so once I figured that out, then it kind of helped me understand, it's going to be like this every time you conquer something new. You're going to get there and you're going to realize that, we all are in that same space where we're becoming. And I also don't subscribe to traditional credentials and status. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care what your degree is. I don't care how many schools you went to. I don't care how much money you've made. Everybody has their assignment, and it is made specifically for you. And nobody else can do it like you. Nobody else can. It's yours. And my great grandmother always used to say, you can give your blessings away, but nobody can take them from you. Nobody. And so I was raised to believe that, and I just see it every day. Like, I see women sit before me, and my gift that God has given me is I can often see a woman's business at success before she can, or sometimes alongside her when she can see it and nobody else believes her. I'm usually like with her, like, you got this. And so I think that for me, coaching women through it is like one of the things I can do. And I got some ladies in here from SistahBiz that I got to shout out: Emily and Greta and Jacqueline and Manushka I saw. And when we're working, I think one of the things that I do is I help people to map. So you see the top of the mountain here, and you might consider yourself at the bottom of the mountain. And that hike is scary to you because you don't know what's going to happen on it or how it's going to happen. And so as a coach, sometimes I'm just helping them figure out what's happening in between, or at least they have a game plan for it. You need to be ready for anything, but you can actually start to tangibly get your hands around here when you map out here from here. And sometimes people haven't done that mapping to see, oh, it's actually not that far, or it's not that hard, or it is hard, but it's totally doable. And so I don't know, I often tell people to go and do some imposter syndrome work with like a therapist or a life coach, or because that's not my specialty, but I can see when it's happening and I will point it out. I did that just 2 weeks ago. I was like, no, this is not my area of expertise. I'm not a therapist, but I can totally spot the imposter syndrome here. And I think you should do some work on that before we even start working on your business. And so she did. She went and worked, and she emailed me a few weeks later and she's like, I got started. I'm working with someone. You're so right. So I see it and I support people through thinking through it. It's not my area of expertise by any means, but I definitely can spot it and help someone else see when it's getting in the way of her business success.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
You did a perfect interlude for something that we had planned, Makisha, that you probably didn't know about, but we've been fortunate enough to hear some of the stories of the women that you've worked with and inspired. And so we asked them, one of the questions was going to be, what advice have you given? But we thought, well, why not chat with some of the women that you've inspired to help change their lives, to share with us what you've done for them. So I'll first, because you mentioned Emily, we can start with Emily, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us how you've been impacted.
I would not mind at all.
Thanks.
So what Makisha just said, so I don't have a career in corporate. I actually came out of the nonprofit sector, but there are tremendous similarities between what Black women experience in that body of work. And so I decided to leave for a lot of the same reasons that we've all heard of. And for about 6 months, I was kind of just floundering, honestly. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I've known Makisha personally for a little while, and I didn't know a ton about the work that she was doing, but I was a Sistahpreneurs Facebook fan and followed closely. And so I called her up and we met for lunch, and she did what she just described, which was she was able to see my success before I even understood what the possibilities were for me. And I told her, I said, Makisha, I feel like a consultant because I feel confident in like the knowledge and the skills and the things that I think I can do. I don't have any idea how to actually be a business owner. None. I have zero idea. So in that meeting, Makisha told me, she's like, you're a six-figure business owner. And I laughed so hard. And I laughed all the way home. And I think I even called my husband and laughed with him for a little while, because I was just like, she crazy. Because it was just so far out of my realm of even possibility, coming particularly from a sector that I've spent so much time in a scarcity mindset because that was a part of how we had to function in order to get the work done. So fast forward, I actually ended up joining her Consulting for Success Accelerator program, which luckily we got in one meeting before the pandemic hit. But I was with her in that program for, oh gosh, Makisha, what was it? Six months?
7 months.
7 months. And it was significantly life-changing. But the thing that I just want to say to you, Makisha, is this, which is the reason why I will show up for Makisha over and over again is because I trust her. I trust her brilliant business mind. I also trust that she sees me in a way that a lot of times people don't. And if she can tell me, if she says I can do it, then I'm like, well, dang it. If Makisha says I can do it, I'll bet you I can. And so she gives me sometimes a confidence and, a bit of an external confidence that sometimes I don't just naturally have. And so I trust her, and I trust that I know that she wants to see me win. So when she gives me advice, I know it is well thought out. I know it's brilliant, and I know she wouldn't put me in a position to set me up to fail. And so when you have that combination in someone, in a coach, it helps you feel, it makes you feel unstoppable in a way. And, the idea of being a 6-figure business owner is all of a sudden not just possible, but it's real. And it's just something that I wouldn't have even put into my brain, y'all. Like, would never have even thought it as a possibility. And Makisha was the one, she's the one that put it in the universe. And she has helped me to navigate this in a way that has really just been tremendous. So Makisha, you're my girl. And she's as wonderful as you all have heard her to be. She's amazing.
No doubt. I feel so uplifted right now. Okay, so we have either Jocelyn or Brittany. Are you on? Can one of you share? I don't hear. What about Creta?
I'm here.
Awesome. Hi.
Hi. So, like Makisha said, she is absolutely no excuse. Like she's been saying, she goes in on you hard. At first, I wasn't sure. I was a little bit afraid to work with her because I wasn't sure she wanted to work with me because I didn't feel like I was where I needed to be in business at the time I started to work with her. But I did. And I would come back from my coaching session so inspired and just ready to go to work. And even now, anytime I do anything in my business, I always think, I wonder if Makisha would be cool with this. Like, should I ask her? Should I say something? Even though she's not like my personal coach anymore, but I always think about things that she said to me in coaching sessions, like, again, is this cool? Like, should I ask her? Should I just do it? Just do it. So she's always in my head when I'm doing something in my business.
That's so funny because I've had a similar experience. I remember walking into work in December and it's a tough year, just like it is for everyone. And I heard Makisha's voice, like, we're not going to save our way to prosperity. We need help. We have to do this in order to grow. And I literally, like, she was in my head. So I totally understand what you're talking about. I bet you everybody's going to say that after this session, like, like words in their head from Makisha that are going to help lift and inspire us. So thank you, Makisha. You are truly amazing. I just feel so fortunate that you did this today and that you shared your wisdom with everyone here and our members. Sure, we're going to hear about this for years to come. So thank you for sharing. I just can't thank you enough. Any last words of advice or wisdom for all of us? I feel like I'm like glomming onto any last thing that you'll say.
Oh my gosh, I'm trying to recover from Creta and Emily. Oh my goodness, Kristen, you got me.
That was Heather's idea.
Oh, Last words. I guess we're going through a time right now in our country where things are changing. And this is an opportunity for us all to level up and really think about how we can contribute to the transformation that's happening in this country. And starting like I knew that this was going to happen. I knew that this was not the pandemic, but not for the sake of keeping it short. In January of last year, I had a dream that told me to read the book of Joel. And I'm not a big, like, I don't remember Bible verses and stuff like that. That's never been my strength. Like, got hit by the nuns for not remembering my religious homework and stuff like that. But I had the dream. So I woke up and I read the book of Joel, and it was like, it was pretty dark. And and so I called up Regina, my friend Regina Groff, who is, I think, on the call. And I was like, sis, can you explain this to me? Because I feel like I'm maybe missing something. Did I do something wrong? Like, I feel like I'm doing what I did. And she was like, we were trying to work through it, and she was explaining the scripture. And after this, I had read the book, I went on a 40-day fast, like cleanse. And on the 40th day was the start of the stay-at-home mandate. And the book of Joel was all about obedience, essentially, and what happens when you're not obedient. And so I want to talk about obedience from the standpoint of living your best life and being your highest self and not allowing yourself to do any less. Don't accept less than your best self, striving for your best self. And because, not just because it's for you, but it's because it's for all of us. We need your best self. And if we can all show up striving to be our best self, like, this is where the real transformation happens and all the game-changing work happens. When you wake up every day committed to becoming your best self. And so I do that work every day. We all do that work, but I just want to encourage you to don't allow yourself to get comfortable when you know you could be so much more, you could dream so much bigger, especially if you're in business. Go way bigger than whatever you think is big, go bigger. Go, that's my advice. Today, go home and think about whatever that big goal was and 10 times it. And not just business-wise, but also personally, spiritually, emotionally, think about what you could do to go bigger, because you can, because you're probably not optimizing who you really are and what you could really bring if you do that.
You make me forget that I'm trying to facilitate this conversation. I'm still sitting here in awe of you, like, oh wait, come back to life. Thank you, Makisha.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you guys for coming and
Incredible. Listening. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for being in my life. I so appreciate you and for sharing with all of us.
I appreciate you too, sis.
Yeah. Have a great day, everyone.